239 years ago, this country wrote protections for persons, houses, papers, and effects. Protections that were never applied equally, but at least written down as a limit on power. In 1787, a group of men in powdered wigs sat in a sweltering room in Philadelphia to draft what became the original social contract. It was not a love letter to freedom. It was a restraint. It was a ceiling, a warning label placed on government authority. See, the framers were not idealists, they were skeptics. They assumed that power would overreach if left unchecked. So they tried, imperfectly and of course selectively, to write boundaries around it. Not because they trusted the government, but because they did not. See, back then, contracts were physical. If you wanted to bind yourself to an agreement, you used a literal bird feather and ink made of soot. You stood in front of another human being. You read, you asked questions, you negotiated. Agreement required effort, presence, and intention. You could not just accidentally sign your rights away. And for most of American history, that principle has held. Contracts were negotiated documents, even when power was unequal, and often it is. Consent is always visible, traceable, slow. You knew when you were entering an agreement, and you generally understood what you were giving up. And that friction mattered. It created space for hesitation, for refusal, for negotiation. Then came computers. See, in the 1970s and 1980s, contracts began migrating onto screens, but the structure still remained familiar. You still signed, you still mailed documents back, you faxed pages, you initiated an agreement, you initialed the margins. You had time to hesitate. The technology changed, but consent still required affirmative, conscious acts. The real shift began in the 1990s when software companies faced a new problem, which was scale. They wanted millions of users instantly. They wanted uniform terms. They wanted zero negotiation. And they wanted legal enforceability without lawyers sitting across from each other. So they needed contracts that could travel faster than people. And that is when we saw the first digital shrink wrap agreements. The terms were printed inside the box of a software package. By opening the packaging, you were deemed to have agreed. You remember those days. Courts upheld these agreements not because they were fair, but because they were convenient. See, even the legal system prioritized efficiency over symmetry. And again, that decision mattered more than anyone realized at the time. Shrink wrap agreements laid the groundwork for something far more powerful. Then came click wraps. Now, by the late 1990s and early 2000s, websites began requiring users to click I agree before proceeding. Courts upheld these too, but with an important assumption that users were choosing between options, at least formally. You could read, you could refuse, you could walk away. But of course, that assumption eroded quickly. As the internet consolidated, click wraps became unavoidable. You could not use essential services without agreeing. There was no alternative contract, no negotiation, no realistic exit. The checkbox became a toll booth. So now participation in modern life required assent. Then came mobile devices. On a phone screen, terms of service became unreadable by design. Pages of dense legal language were compressed into 6-point fonts, hidden behind hyperlinks, presented at moments of maximum friction, right when you wanted to post, message, scroll, log in. And so consent stopped being deliberate. It became reflexive. We've trained ourselves to click I agree the way we swat a fly, just annoyed, automatic, without looking. By the 2010 years, click wraps were no longer about notice of consent, they were about data extraction. Platforms realized the real asset it was behavior, location, relationships, patterns, prediction. So then the contracts evolved. These contracts stopped describing services and started licensing people. They expanded from governing how software could be used to governing who users were. Your posts, your drafts, your metadata, your location, your associations, your habits, your identity. And still, the law treated these agreements as voluntary. And by the time artificial intelligence entered the picture, the groundwork had already been laid. Clickwraps had normalized the idea that private companies could demand sweeping permissions as the price of participating in modern life. And we didn't debate this shift. We did not vote on it. We simply accepted it, one checkbox at a time. And let me just be very clear about something because this is not theoretical for me. I do this work for a living. I negotiate contracts with vendors every single day, software vendors, data vendors, cloud providers, companies that send over a purchase order that quietly points to online terms buried behind a hyperlink with language that says, those terms can be updated at any time without notice at their sole discretion. In the real world of business, that is an automatic strike. That is not a contract. That is a moving target. If a vendor sends me a purchase order that says this agreement is subject to our online terms as updated from time to time, my answer is automatically no, full stop, because no serious company agrees to be bound by obligations that can change after the ink is dry. So here is what actually happens in legitimate contracting. We take your terms, we download them, we attach them as an exhibit, we negotiate them line by line if necessary. And once we finalize what both sides can live with, those terms are locked. No unilateral updates, no silent revisions, no surprise changes pushed live on a random Tuesday at midnight. And you may be asking why. It's because enforceability requires stability, because consent requires notice, because risk cannot be managed if the rules keep changing. See, any vendor who insists on the right to change terms unilaterally without negotiation or meaningful notice is telling you something very important. They want control without accountability. And that is precisely the behavior we would never tolerate in a commercial setting. Yet somehow, when the counterparty is a platform instead of a vendor, we pretend that the rules are different. We accept what we would reject instantly in any boardroom. We allow companies to say, you agreed, when what they really mean is, you had no choice. From a contract law perspective, honestly, this is extraordinary. In my world, if a vendor tried to enforce a material change to risk allocation, data rights, or liability limits through a unilateral online update, that clause would be challenged immediately. At minimum, it would trigger renegotiation, and at worst, it would invalidate the contract. But ClickWraps flipped that logic. They've normalized the idea that silence equals consent, that continued use equals agreement, that your failure to notice an update equals acceptance of new risks. And that logic has now migrated out of commerce and into citizenship. See, when TikTok United States Data Security updates its terms, you are not given an exhibit, you are not given red lines, you are not given a negotiation window, you are not even giving meaningful notice. You are given a choice between compliance and exclusion. That is not consent. That is coercion dressed up as convenience. So when I say that January 22nd, 2026 marks the moment the click wrap replaced the social contract, I am not speaking metaphorically. I'm speaking as a contracts attorney who knows exactly what would happen if this behavior showed up in any other context. It simply would not survive scrutiny, which brings us to what actually happened on January 22nd. With the new updated terms, this was no longer just a contract with a social media company. It has now become a contract with a government adjacent data security joint venture. A document that authorizes the collection of sensitive personal information, precise geolocation, biometric identifiers, religious affiliation, citizenship, immigration status, and it stores that data on domestic server infrastructure operated by companies that build federal systems. Do you see a problem there? At that point, I agree stopped meaning I consent to use this app. It started meaning I waive expectations that were once constitutional. So, what began as a convenience for software companies has become an architecture of surveillance enforced by contracts you cannot negotiate, cannot meaningfully refuse, and cannot fully understand in the moment they are presented. And no, we didn't lose our rights overnight. I'm not suggesting that. We clicked them away slowly, silently, one update at a time on Facebook, on Instagram, Pinterest, you name it. But on January 22nd, that imperfect promise written in 1787 was no longer even pretending to apply. It was replaced by a very strategically drafted Clickwrap that I don't think anyone could have expected. Today, the boundary is being rewritten as a contract you never negotiated. We did not modernize constitutional protections for the digital age. We outsourced restraints to software and called it innovation. Consent is now engineered to disappear. One frictionless tap with zero leverage. The Fourth Amendment was written to stop general warrants, blank permission to just search everyone all the time. It worked because privacy was physical. Thoughts lived on paper, paper lived in drawers, drawers lived in homes, homes have walls. But now your thoughts live in drafts. Your papers are your direct messages. Your home is a precise geolocation coordinate on a map owned by a joint venture. And when you click I agree, you are signing a private general warrant, permission to collect everything without suspicion or limitation. You are telling TikTok United States Data Security Joint Ventures Limited Liability Company, mouthful. You're telling them I grant you a license to my metadata, my precise location, and my immigration status. And because this is a private entity, the Fourth Amendment does not block it. The data is collected under contract, not warrants. And once collected, it flows through government contracted cloud infrastructure legally, quietly, efficiently. Washington and Franklin rebelled over taxation without representation. In 2026, we are living through surveillance without representation. You did not vote on these terms. You did not debate them in public. They arrived in an email at 4 o'clock in the morning, written by lawyers who know that a 15-second dance trend or the latest who the bleep did I marry formed refusal every time. The social contract is no longer a handshake, it's a hijack. Now, I do already hear the comments. What about Facebook? What about Instagram? And you're absolutely right to question that. Meta built its empire on attention extraction, but there is a fundamental legal difference. And this may evolve. But from what we see right now, Meta wants your money. They want to sell you shoes you already bought yesterday. TikTok, United States Data Security, wants your inventory. This is not a routine update, it's a structural shift. As of January 22nd, if you are using TikTok, you are no longer contracting with a global social media company operating at arm's length from the States. You are contracting with TikTok United States Data Security Joint Venture Limited Liability Company, an entity controlled by Oracle, Silver Lake, and MGX. This was sold to us as a divestiture. What it actually is an integration. You now have the world's largest enterprise data company, a private equity powerhouse, and a sovereign wealth fund built around artificial intelligence sitting in Abu Dhabi, all sitting at the same table. And the chips on that table are not content, they are identity. And let's remember, this is simply for using the app TikTok. To understand the scale of this shift, you have to look at the contracts side by side. So in 2024, your agreement with TikTok Incorporated, a standard California corporation. In 2026, that entity is gone. You are now bound to a joint venture legally classified as a commercial item under Federal Code 48, Code of the Federal Regulations, Section 2.101. And in plain English, this entity is a government contractor first and an app second. TikTok. In 2024, the app requested location to serve local advertisements. In 2026, that is replaced by precise geolocation, accurate to within 15 feet, including floor level data. And the 2026 terms introduce an entirely new category: sensitive personal information. TikTok. The 2024 terms never mentioned immigration status. The 2026 terms explicitly authorize collection of racial or ethnic origin, religious beliefs, and citizenship or immigration status. TikTok. Why does a video application need to know if you are documented? In 2024, your data improved the algorithm. In 2026, Section 3.5 grants an irrevocable artificial intelligence training license. Irrevocable. Your private, unposted drafts, the thoughts you never shared, are now training material for artificial intelligence systems owned by Oracle. Now, look at the headlines. Step away from the For You page. Look at the language of mass deportations, national security sweeps, and data driven enforcement. When a company majority owned by American investors with deep ties to the administration asks for your immigration status and precise location and stores that information on infrastructure the government can legally access, you have to ask yourself a question that has nothing to do with technology. Is this for advertising or is this a digital dragnet? The First Amendment restrains the government. It does not restrain a private joint venture. TikTok United States data security can bury speech while harvesting data. Dissent can be silenced while movement is tracked. And Section 3.1 builds the bridge. So the security side collects your sensitive personal information. Then the business side uses it for commerce. And because they are classified as service providers to each other, the transfer is not considered a sale. It is instead an operational necessity. The wall was never built to keep foreign governments out. It was built to keep liability out. And if you think you will just see them in court, well, look at Section 8.3. In 2024, you had the standard statute of limitations, usually 3 or 4 years. But in 2026, you are agreeing to a 1 year window. 1 year. So if your location is shared today, but you do not discover how it was obtained for 14 months, for example, your claim is dead. You waived accountability before you ever even knew you were harmed. And I hate to be grim, but if you're using TikTok, this is the end of the line. We have to stop looking at the For You page and recognize the For the States page underneath it. And this actually might evolve to other platforms that we use regularly. This is not a security update, it is a domestic dragnet. By the simple click of I agree, we are trading the Fourth Amendment for a 15-second scroll. And the people running the cloud are the same people building the infrastructure the state relies on. And what this all means is that you are not a citizen in this system. You are a commercial item. You are not a creator. You are unpaid training data. The servers did not move to protect you, they moved to make access to you easier. I personally have not clicked I agree, and that means I have been unable to access TikTok for quite a few days. And now that you have seen the ownership, the bridge, and the liability trap, you understand why. My name is Patience. This is the Sidebar. I read the fine print so you do not have to, and I may never return to TikTok. From here on out, what happens to your data is absolutely your choice. Stay informed, stay aware, stay private, and for the love of God, stop clicking accept until you understand the costs.